What, do you need something? No? All right, then yeah. I mean, you're welcome to stay for class. Yeah, come on. All right, here we are, and I think the clock today is actually on time. I'm the one that's late. Sorry about that. We were doing some discussion after the sermon, so thanks to all of you who came up and asked questions or made comments. Yeah, thanks. So what I'd like to do to start class off is just continue the prayer for Juanita. Let me give you a little update. I went and saw Juanita and Rodney on Thursday evening last week. Hey, Curtis. And she's home, and once again, you wouldn't know anything's wrong at all. She's just a wonderful little lady she always is, full of energy, trying to get up and make me a sandwich and all this other stuff. And I was like, no, you just came home from the hospital. You're not going to make me a sandwich. But she still has the situation where she gets tired, and now the frustration, as you heard Les say this morning, where they're waiting for this date for whatever the surgery is, and there's still one test that she has to undergo in order to make sure what the surgery itself is actually going to be. So, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you have to hurry up and wait, but it's not fun. So I want to make sure that we're continuing to pray for them, and specifically for Juanita. And of course, Rodney is just a big mess without Juanita. So, the dishes stack up in the sink, and the laundry doesn't get done, and all that stuff, and he's just a man with no way to move forward. So we need to make sure that they're there for each other. And then, as mentioned, the Lance family, Jerry passed away last Wednesday rather quickly. Joy and I talked on Thursday as well, and she said it just came a lot quicker than she thought. And then I talked with Mabel this morning early about Molly, and I think it's fair to say that there's not rejoicing, but there is comfort and peace that Molly's with Jesus and that she's no longer suffering from the things that we've seen her suffer from over the last several months and years. So let's just start with a prayer for these, and then we'll jump into our story of David. Father, Son, and Spirit, Yahweh God, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for all those that are gathered here in this room and also online. And as you've just heard us discuss some details about what you're much more familiar with even than we are, the inner thoughts and feelings of these people, I just pray that you'll be with the Lance family this week as they lay Jerry to rest on Tuesday. I pray that you'll be with Juanita and Rodney as they continue to wait on schedules and have questions and medications and tests and surgeries and things. And we love them, we know you love them, and we know at their age, every little thing seems like a major big thing. And may we remember that when we're interacting with them. And then the Jordans and Molly being with you, what we thought would probably be even sooner than now, but we're thankful that she's there now. And we look forward to when we'll be there as well. So we just lift all these people to you and their families, and as we go into the Thanksgiving time season, may it go positively and as well as possible for the families that are gathered around a table without someone that was normally there. And we look forward, as we talked about this morning, to gathering around your table when we're all together for eternity. It's in your name, and thankful only to you that we have that to look forward to. Amen. Okay, so I got to do one thing very first thing this morning. Last week, we were talking about transporting the ark. And I think I made the comment of I didn't understand all these blue sheets in these drawings, right? And I talked to Dr. Cloud, and he didn't remember this either, but David Cruz did. And David Cruz sent me a text and said, I think it's from Numbers chapter 4. So I went and looked in Numbers chapter 4, and lo and behold, as Dr. Cloud would say, there it was. There was an accounting being done of the Kohathites, and when that was being done, there's the instructions that then they must put over it a covering of fine leather and spread over that a cloth entirely of blue, and then they must insert the poles. So Dr. Cloud and I talked about it at length during the week last week, and we were thinking that doesn't mean every single time it got transported it looked that way, but it does give biblical evidence that sometimes it did. So we don't really know when it would have been covered, when it would have been uncovered. If you look at the other ancient Near Eastern civilizations that had boxes that were representative of their deity, they mostly didn't cover theirs. They went ahead of the people as this is who we're marching behind, which is the same type thing Yahweh did. But that does help explain why all those drawings and things you see in your VBS your VBS curriculum that have blue over it, you know where it comes from. So it's just interesting when it's not in the book you're talking about. You know, it's not in Exodus, it's not in the making of the tabernacle or in the plans for the tabernacle or building those things. And so it just slipped our mind. So thank you for pointing that out. And now you know that those pictures are accurate. So today is supposed to be turmoil in David's house, 2 Samuel chapters 13 through 20. And let me just tell you, if you go out there and you want to start doing a big study on 2 Samuel 13, you won't find much, because we're in a world where certain vocabulary words like rape, for example, or incest and other words like that will, you know, they're being scrubbed. So you won't find too many lessons. You'll find a lot of lessons that start on 2 Samuel 14 and move forward, but not many on 13. So that's a challenge. We're looking at betrayal and rebellion and grief and restoration, and we're still contrasting this with the good news to come in Jesus. So these chapters cover events from Amnon and Tamar, which I referenced in chapter 13, to Sheba's rebellion in chapter 20, and that's not a female, that's a male Sheba. So I was looking at this, and I was thinking about themes. There's sin's consequences, there's family conflict, there's rebellion, and yet there's God's sovereignty while all this is going on, right? And we're really starting to see how someone chosen by God, still being a broken, human, sinful, person, can still have all of these consequences that occur. And the key figures that we're looking at are obviously David and Amnon and Tamar and Absalom and Jonadab and Joab and Sheba. So have you ever had a difficult assignment? Because I was thinking to myself, this is a great Sunday for Dr. Cloud to not be available, and we also didn't record because Juanita didn't get home from the hospital till Thursday, and I didn't want to put anything else on them. So I'm like, great, this is great. Let me just noodle through this a little bit and figure out exactly how to cover these chapters with these very challenging things and do it in 45 minutes. And I would say that we might not get finished. I have enough slides that if we don't, we'll just spill over to next week and conclude then. But we start with Amnon and Tamar. And if you're not familiar with this story, do I dare say you should be? Yeah, probably. You probably should be, just for general Bible knowledge and understanding what's going on that David has to start dealing with in his house. Because, of course, we're post the Bathsheba-Uriah incident now, and so God has told him through Nathan, your house is going to be a mess. The sword's not going to depart your house. You're going to have all kinds of problems. This is starting to show some of his lack of interaction with his own children. When things go wrong, his fatherly qualities don't come shining through. He usually retreats and tries to stay away from whatever's going on and not get involved in what's going on, and hopefully it'll go by. And in this case, he didn't even have that opportunity because he's lied to up front. But when we look here in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3 of 2 Samuel, it says, "Now David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar," and we would actually say, sister. We'll look at that here in a minute. Yeah, that's right, sister. In the course of time, David's son Amnon fell madly in love with her. So Amnon would be the half-brother. Absalom's the full brother. But Amnon became frustrated because he was lovesick over his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and to Amnon it seemed out of the question to do anything to her. Now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shimei, and Jonadab was a very crafty man. So you can see just in those verses, there's like a dark cloud, there's an ominous sound to this, right? You've got the multiple wives of David that we've talked about. You've got children from those multiple wives, and now you've got one that's infatuated with one of their half siblings, and then you have a friend that's coming in to try to take the side of the person who's got the infatuation problem. So this spells disaster, as you might already know. So Amnon ends up lusting after his half-sister Tamar, and then Jonadab comes in with a plan. And he says, you know what, why don't you tell your father that you're not feeling well? So there's David. Why don't you tell David that you're not feeling well and have him send Tamar in with, food and not necessarily medicine, but things to administer to him. And then he goes on to spell out the plan of what you do when she comes in, right? And so Amnon thinks this is a great idea, apparently. That's what he ends up doing. Tamar comes in thinking she's helping her half-brother at her dad's request, which you see in the verses there where David says, yeah, go do this, take care of your brother. It would be a good thing for you to do, not knowing what's going to happen. Amnon takes advantage of her. She pleads with him not to do that. And then after he does that, then he despises her, the text says. He actually, imagine going from 100 miles an hour to 0. He goes from infatuation with her, can't think about anything else but her, to then not wanting her in his sight. And it was because of him. So she gets sent away. She gets sent away crying and in shame, tears her robe that was a signal of status change, and then leaves. And Absalom's anger begins to grow because, he loves his sister and hated to see this happen. So this is just one of the instances that is packed into these chapters. So then Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went out on her way, wailing as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, and this sounds harsh. He says, was Amnon your brother with you? Now be quiet, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take it so seriously. And Tamar, devastated, lived in the house of her brother Absalom. And we might say, well, what in the world's going on there? He doesn't sound like he's all that upset if he's telling her don't take it so seriously. And we might even have women in here or online who would say, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say. You're not the woman in that situation. But there's more to this. Hebrew helps us out here. It's don't set your heart to this thing. Elsewhere, the phrase means to discard or to not pay attention to something, like in Exodus 7:23. So he's not saying to her, really, oh, this isn't any big deal, you shouldn't feel bad. He's saying, move on as if it didn't happen, and there's a reason. He's saying, move on as if it didn't happen, because even though it seems like it's a callous thing to say to Tamar, but what he's really saying is it will help mislead people from understanding that he is personally plotting revenge against Amnon. That doesn't make it any better. That doesn't make us want to be in that situation, right? But it helps a little bit with what the English translation says that I think helps us understand it a little bit more. So Absalom never said a word to Amnon. That's interesting, right? This hatred and this revenge and this planning and plotting that he has against Amnon is not even something that he attempts to discuss with him. Either good or bad, the text says. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. And then so we keep moving through 13. Absalom waits 2 years, so there's a lot of time to sit there and harbor this hatred towards Amnon, right? There's a lot of time to make a plan, to figure out when the opportunity would arise, what you're going to do. And he murders Amnon during a feast, which we found this picture, if you will. And I don't know about you, but doesn't this start to sound reminiscent to a lot of things that we see in the entertainment world? Like, I know I've had this conversation, I think, with some of you before, where the master story that's up here, what we call the meta-narrative of Scripture, that everything under human life makes sense under. When we get creative and we start making other stories, we think they're fictional, and they are fictional, but then they have elements of things that seem to connect sometimes to things that are in the Bible, and you kind of scratch your head and say, I wonder if they put that scene in there because they were thinking about 2 Samuel 13, or if they have no idea about 2 Samuel 13. The point is, you can't suppress the real story of humanity, and it shows up in different places. So I was thinking when we saw this picture and we put it up there about a murder during a feast, there's plenty of times in several different like Middle Ages type settings of things where these kind of things happened, right? Where they would do something that looked like it was an invitation to something, and it was really a scheme in order to get somebody to know where someone was going to be, because you would know they were going to attend the dinner, and then it was all set up to eliminate that person. And it's just interesting that it's right here in the Bible. And then he flees after this happens, or actually he goes through with this deed to Geshur for 3 years. So 5 years here has gone by since the incident between Amnon and Tamar. And David mourns but longs for Absalom. And we might say, well, doesn't David understand what went on here? Yes, I think he does. And I think this shows again David's character. Both of his sons are messed up, right? Neither one of them would he be happy with what they did. He can't do anything to bring Amnon back, but that doesn't mean he automatically hates his other son Absalom either. He's willing apparently to have some sort of restoration there, some sort of forgiveness, right from the beginning, which, well, that's what we teach everybody we should do, right? That's what Jesus asks us to do. There's flashes of this here with David. So let's look at the family turmoil for a minute in case you're wondering how did all this happen. Well, you've got the wives there of David in purple, and then the daughter in purple underneath. So you can see how Amnon was influenced by Jonadab and from Ahinoam and David, not from I'm going to mess that up. Ma'ak. Yeah, no. Okay, the other wife. I always pronounce that one wrong. So you can see how they're half siblings. But what's interesting is this dotted line from Jonadab over. I find that fascinating because I'm not sure if it's indicating just that he was the influencer, which we already know that he was, or if he was the influencer and then he ends up with Tamar after Amnon is out of the way, which would also be an interesting sort of soap opera type twist to that. Cousin, yeah, cousin. Well, yes, because of the, yeah, right. But it's just, yes, David's saying cousin, and that, right, with the genograms and the family trees. But I'm just wondering why they indicate that he slides over besides just being a cousin. Maybe it's nothing. It just stood out to me when I saw that. So 2 Samuel 14, we move on. Absalom's return. Joab arranges for Absalom's return because he's tired of listening to David be so upset about him being gone and longing for him, right? And Absalom is reconciled but not fully restored. He comes back, and yet there are still some political issues and some strife that you could imagine is there. But his charm and his appearance wins people's hearts. He goes out to the city. See if I have that here. Yeah. Look at what he does here. He goes out to the city gates, and then sometime later, Absalom managed to acquire a chariot and horses, as well as 50 men to serve as his royal guard. So he has his own group of people, his own entourage with him. Now, Absalom used to get up early and stand beside the road that led to the city gate, and whenever anyone came by who had a complaint to bring to the king for arbitration, Absalom would call out to him and say, "What city are you from?" And the person would answer, "I, your servant, am from one of the tribes of Israel." And then Absalom would say, "Look, your claims are legitimate and appropriate, but there is no representative of the king who will listen to you." And then he goes on to say, "If only they would make me a judge in the land, then everyone who had a judicial complaint could come to me, and I would make sure that he receives a just settlement." So he's playing the politics here, right? He's trying to work people over into getting behind him, that he's extending some service that they want, but he's winning the people over to where eventually when he calls on those people, they will be fans of his, right? They will be influenced by him. And Absalom would extend his hand and embrace him and kiss him. Absalom acted this way towards everyone in Israel who came to the king for justice. In this way, Absalom won the loyalty of the citizens of Israel. So I think it's interesting that here in 15, he's already plotting things that are going to make his head-to-head contest with David for the kingship of Israel even this far back. So Absalom declares himself king in Hebron, which is interesting because that's where David was claimed Hebron. In Hebron was where David was claimed to be king the first time, remember? And Absalom gains support through flattery. And some of us have been studying Proverbs on Wednesday nights, and it's interesting that that word flattery is used there. Flattery is not always bad, right? You can say to someone, I like your outfit, or your hair looks nice, or whatever, and there's nothing sinful about doing that. But this flattery is manipulative. This is with intent to do something that's deceitful. By flattering these people and by saying these things, he's amassing followers that are going to be a political power claim later. David flees Jerusalem with loyal followers with him. He hears this happen, and here's what I was saying earlier. David oftentimes reacts not like you would think a wise father would, of having control of their children and sitting down and having to have tough discussions. But instead, well, if this is happening, I'm just going to leave and get out of the way, and maybe dark cloud will pass over and it'll take care of itself, which of course it does not. And the key allies here are Zadok, Abiathar, and Hushai. And maybe that's what Absalom looked like, the prince who defied his father, King David, and decided that he wanted to take the throne. So David's flight. Zadok and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. Look at this. You have the king leaving Jerusalem, and you have the Ark of God going before them with the king. So that would send a message to the people, right? Or not only is our king leaving due to personal issues with his son, but he's carrying the Ark of God, which means Yahweh would be leaving with him as well. That would be very concerning to people. When they positioned the Ark of God, Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. That's in 2 Samuel 15:24. Then the king, David, said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back to the city. If I find favor in the Lord's sight, he will bring me back and enable me to see both it and its dwelling place, or his dwelling place here again. However, if he should say, I do not take pleasure in you, then he will deal with me in a way that he considers appropriate." That might be the most redeeming quality of David in this whole situation, is wait a minute, let's not do this. Let's not take God, not literally, but let's not take God's representation away from his city. Go ahead and take it back, and if God finds favor with me, then he will return me to the city. There's no sense in me carrying him with me away from the people. That's the heart of David right there, I think. That's him doing a level-headed decision. And then going on to say, and if he doesn't take pleasure in me, then he'll deal with me in an appropriate way, and it won't affect the people in Jerusalem. So I think that's a bright, shining spot in this whole narrative here. And as David was going up the Mount of Olives, that should give us pause, right? He's in a distraught, emotional state here. He's made these quick decisions. He's going to leave. He's going to send the ark back. And where does he go to think all this over, to pray this out, but the Mount of Olives, which is where Jesus goes often, right, in the New Testament. He was weeping as he went. His head was covered, and his feet were bare. All the people who were with him also had their heads covered and were weeping as they went up. So they're in mourning still, maybe not necessarily just for Amnon, but for and with King David. So we look at where on the map they were coming from. Absalom's army is in green, and they're down here in Hebron, where he has made himself self-proclaimed king, right? And then David flees Jerusalem, and he's ahead of them. And then they end up going up there to the forest of Ephraim, is where the encounter is going to be. And along the way, David encounters Ziba, and Shimei curses David, and David accepts humiliation as God's will, which is all contained in chapter 16. So, moving on in 16, 5 through 8, then King David reached Bahurim, where a man from Saul's extended family named Shimei, son of Gera, came out yelling curses as he approached. He threw stones at David and all of King David's servants, as well as all the people and the soldiers who were on his left and on his right. As he yelled curses, Shimei said, "Leave, leave, you man of bloodshed, you wicked man." And then the Lord. So he says Yahweh. Yahweh has punished you for all the spilled blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you rule. Now Yahweh has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. Disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of bloodshed. Well, let's parse this out a little bit. Is he a man of bloodshed? Yes. Are the other things true about Yahweh's being upset with him and giving the kingdom to his son Absalom? No. This person seems to have a lot of misinformation about the fact that he's blaming David for Saul's problems, which David was not the genesis of Saul's problems. Saul was the genesis of Saul's problems, right? So we might even say this is sort of a false prophetic statement in a way, because he hasn't put anything on him other than whatever the cursing is, telling him to leave. Some of what he has said is factual, but a lot of it is not. And so then we kind of have the rest of 16 and 17 where Absalom is in Jerusalem. Hushai versus Ahithophel's counsel. If you don't remember that, David says to Hushai, he says, you go back and you actually kind of infiltrate what's going on there, and then get word to me what Absalom is deciding to do. And so Hushai does that, but Ahithophel goes and gives his plan to Absalom, and Absalom listens to it. And then Hushai comes in and gives another plan, and Absalom likes Hushai's plan better. And so then he runs back, Hushai does, and goes back and informs David and his men of what Absalom has decided to do, where he's going to pursue them when he's coming, and what they must do to stay ahead of him. But what's fascinating is, if we go back to that map for a second, I think what that map's trying to show us is that Hushai buys David some time. They end up at the forest of Ephraim, but notice the green line representing Absalom comes in from the left, and the red line representing David and his men come in from the right. So that plan that Hushai presents to Absalom ends up slowing them down enough to allow David to be prepared for their arrival. And then Ahithophel commits suicide by hanging himself when his plan is not accepted by Absalom. He goes home after Absalom says, no, we're going to go with Hushai's plan, and he goes home and hangs himself. So just lots of just yuck going on in this story. And it gets worse. What happened in the forest of Ephraim? You have this tree here, and you can see Absalom there hanging by his hair, and the horses and the spears that are through him. So in 2 Samuel 18, the battle in the forest of Ephraim is well underway, and David's forces are led by Joab, and there's still some tension there between Joab and David. Remember, Joab was not on David's side originally, and then comes over after David's made king of all the northern tribes and the southern tribes. And there's still apparently not great agreement between them, because he's leading David's forces, but he doesn't always do what David asks him to do. He makes some of his own decisions. Absalom is caught in a tree by his hair. Some translations say his head. We don't really know. I mean, if you're caught by your head, you're probably not going to be alive, because if you think your neck and your breathing airway would be involved, right? So hair's probably all right, but if Dr. Cloud was here, he would probably, noodle through that with us in a little bit more detail than I have for you this morning. But some translations say head, some say hair. He's suspended from the tree, and he's not dead. And he's suspended from either his hair, which we might think would tear out, or his hair and his head. Somehow he's caught up in the tree. And Joab kills Absalom against David's orders. David actually said to Joab and all of his men, pursue Absalom, but don't harm him for my sake, for David's sake. And Joab just blows that off and just says, no, I'm going to make my own decision. And so he goes ahead and has Absalom killed. And then David mourns the famous line from David's mourning of, "Oh, Absalom, my son," and goes on to say, "I would have rather died in your place than you die." So we have this tension building, or has built to this point, between these two people, between Joab and David. And if we read a little bit here in 18:2b, second half of verse 2 through 4, the king said to the troops, I too will indeed march out with you. So David's saying, I'm going to go with you to the forest of Ephraim, and I'm going to fight with you. But the soldiers replied, you should not do this, for if we should have to make a rapid retreat, they won't be concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, they won't be concerned. But you are like 10,000 of us. So it is better if you remain in the city for support. And then the king said to them, I will do whatever seems best to you. So again, we see this situation that happened earlier where David went out to battle and he would have been run over if it hadn't been for Abishai. And here he's saying, hey, now maybe I can go to battle with you. And they're still saying no. As a matter of fact, now you're even more valuable than you were then. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose 10,000 troops, 10,000 people with you, but to say that one person is worth 10,000 is, it tells you exactly what they think of David. And then there's also that other little line in there, though, that if we have to make a rapid retreat, so they're not certain that they would be successful, and that's the other issue that's on their mind. But Absalom is this expert politician who stands out at the gates of the city and convinces people that he would be a better leader than David, that he would take care of the people better than David is taking care of them. But he's also a failed warrior because he's, I don't know, can we say he's maybe a little narcissistic? I'm assuming that long hair wouldn't have necessarily been an anomaly, even though you would think that military people probably would not want long hair because they might have something happen like what happens here, where he gets hung in the tree, right? Can't say that for certain. But thinking of him being a failed warrior, he's not as rough and tough as he's more skilled with his words than he is with his other weapons. And there's various drawings of what he looked like. Here he looks a lot more muscular, like a warrior would look, still with long hair and stuck in the tree. Then Absalom happened to come across David's men. Now, as Absalom was riding on his mule, which you would also think he would be on a horse, but he's on a mule, it went under the branches of a large oak tree. His head got caught. There's a translation that says head instead of hair. A head got caught in the oak, and he was suspended in midair while the mule he had been riding kept going. So you're riding under this branch, and some of you have probably been on horseback rides where you just can't wait till it's over because you're not an expert horseman. And then you go under a branch, and the next thing you know, your horse is just going on, and you're just suspended, hanging there behind it, right? That's a very vulnerable position. There's nothing he could do. He can't reach any of his weapons. He can't get down. He's up high enough, at least, that other people could pass underneath him. And so this man comes and tells Joab that they have found him in the tree. They found Absalom in the tree. And the man replied to Joab after Joab says, well, did you strike him down? And the man says, even if I were receiving 1,000 pieces of silver, and let me qualify that. Joab says, did you strike him down? And he says, no. And then he says, well, if you had, I would have given you a belt of honor, is what some of the English translations say. And you think, a belt of honor? Yeah, it would have been like a medal of recognition like we see today for certain feats if he had done this. But this guy has a more level head on his shoulders than Joab does, because he responds to Joab and says, even if I were receiving 1,000 pieces of silver, much less this belt of honor you're talking about, I would not strike the king's son. In our very presence, the king gave this order to you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. So he reminds Joab, and Joab has not killed Absalom yet, of what King David told them, and it doesn't matter to Joab. So Joab takes 3 spears in his hand and thrusts them into the middle of Absalom while he was still alive in the middle of the oak tree. Some of the translations say that the 3 spears went into his heart in the heart of the oak tree. It's a wordplay in Hebrew off of the heart of the matter, or the center of the matter. What this word here is saying, into the middle. It's like into the core of both the tree is where he was stuck, and also obviously him. So that's why you see those different translations. Heart might be literal for him. Obviously the tree doesn't have a heart, but the tree has a middle. And so in this case, they just went with the middle of him and the middle of the tree. Then 10 soldiers who were Joab's armor bearers struck Absalom and finished him off. So there's actually, sort of this indication that there might not really be sport involved, but it wasn't a gracious killing, right? If Absalom didn't actually die from Joab. And so then we get 2 Samuel 18:23. Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I could have died instead of you. And I guess if you're like me, this gives us pause on why would he feel this way? What does he mean? And the only thing I can think of is just a father's love for his son, even when his son has done wrong. And we should, I think about like Luke 15, on the loving father looking on the horizon for the son to come back. And then when the son comes back, treating that son in a way that he doesn't deserve. Well, that's what David's modeling here through this. I mean, the other people probably don't understand. Joab sure doesn't understand based on what he does next when he comes and has a conversation with David we're getting ready to look at. But I think here we have to stop and think this is, again, the heart of God, a man with God's heart, another way of saying it, because that graciously loving father in Luke 15 is God in that parable. And he's responding in that parable the same way David is basically saying here. So we move to chapter 19. 2 Samuel 19 is David's restoration. But Joab rebukes David for excessive mourning. He basically says, get over it. Get over the fact that Absalom is dead, which is ruthless, in our mind. David returns to Jerusalem after being talked to by Joab, and political tensions remain because there's still turmoil in the kingdom. So let's look at what happens here with Joab. So Joab visits the king at his home, and he said, today you have embarrassed all your servants who have saved your life this day. Now you're sitting there mourning your son, both sons really. He's still probably upset about Amnon as well. And your general walks in and tells you that you've embarrassed your entire servants and everyone who saved your life. And I guess the saving your life is we kept you from going to battle. In other words, you might have died while you were out there, so you owe your life to us, and here you are sobbing all day. He says, as well as the lives of your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your concubines. So now he's throwing everybody that David is connected to into this, that he's embarrassed them all, and that he's let them all down. You seem to love your enemies and hate your friends, for you have as much as declared today that the leaders and servants don't matter to you. All because of the way he's acting over his son. And then this really gets poignant and stings. I realize now that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, it would be all right with you. So get up now and go out and give some encouragement to your servants, for I swear by Yahweh that if you don't go out there, not a single man will stay here with you tonight. This disaster will be worse for you than any disaster that has overtaken you from your youth right to the present time. So it's a threat, but it's also this huge wake-up call, right? It's like you haven't really treated your people properly, and you're going to sit here and you're going to let everybody that looks to you as the king suffer or just be without a king while you are in mourning over your son. Get up, clean up, get out there and do what you're supposed to be doing, is basically what Joab's saying. And interestingly enough, David does that. He's probably not completely happy with Joab for doing this, but he does get up and he returns to Jerusalem and comes back and starts acting like the king again. Because sort of similarly to the way it happened with Saul, when Saul was out of the way and then the people made David king, now that this skirmish is over and Absalom's out of the way, then David returns to being king. So that's what I meant earlier about sometimes he seems to hide from his responsibility, just waiting for it to pass. In this case, he was willing to wait even longer, but Joab was not willing for him to wait. And then we get to chapter 20, Sheba's revolt. I don't know how much you know about Sheba. We usually think of the Queen of Sheba, right, when we hear the name. But this is a male, a wicked man, the text tells us in verse 1, named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there. He blew the trumpet and said, we have no share in David. We have no inheritance in this son of Jesse. Every man go home, O Israel. So he's just denouncing David as being anything they should give a second look to. They have no, he's saying we don't support David. We don't have any inheritance in this son of Jesse, which would be, we have nothing to stand to gain by him being our king. And just outright false statement. That's not the way things are. When this is several verses down, I should have filled this in verse. So what ends up happening is Joab goes out and goes into this area, and he has conversations about where is this guy Sheba. And he comes across a servant, and they say that's not the way things are. There's a man from the hill country. Actually, this is Joab answering them. They're suspecting that they're there to do them harm or something. He goes, no, we're looking for a man. We're looking for a man from the hill country of Ephraim named Sheba, son of Bichri. He has rebelled against King David. Give me just this one man, Joab says, and I will leave the city. And the woman says to Joab, this very minute his head will be thrown over the wall for you. Well, I've seen some strange things in Scripture, but this one's still shocking every time I read it. A woman who the town is concerned about military people being there and what is their mission, rightfully so, right? But then to have this kind of reaction and for it to be this quick. Okay, if that's what you're looking for, well, just hang on a second. I'll be right back. And we'll just throw his head over the wall, which is exactly what happens. Sheba declares rebellion. A wise woman negotiates Sheba's execution, and then the rebellion ends. So once again, things are being taken care of for David, I would say providentially, through other people. Even though Joab is not his best bud, God's still taking care of David through Joab, through these different events that have taken place. So I would say what we'll do, I can't believe we got through chapter 20. I say what we'll do is, since it's 2 minutes till 11, we will pick up here next week and then continue what we wanted to look at, really right up to Solomon. But we're going to have this coming together, or this synergy around the gospel according to David, how we see in David's life the things, especially the things we just went through rather rapidly, how they foreshadow the need for Jesus and the distinctiveness of Jesus as our king versus David as a king. Where David failed, where Jesus did not. We'll do a comparison and contrast. So, and then that will conclude this lesson on David, and it will also conclude this class in here for the auditorium. Les and Scott will be back in here on December the 7th for the foreseeable future until we find out about Juanita and how Dr. Cloud and I might present in another offering. So I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for being here, and enjoy your day.